Hello, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you are in the world today. My name is Ben Caldecott. I'm going to be your chair today. Welcome to the Sustainable Investment Forum Europe 2020. The Sustainable Investment Forum Europe is a four-part series. We are entering today as the fourth part of this very exciting series, and today we're going to be discussing things like has the EU responded effectively to COVID-19, and what does that mean for the future of sustainable finance and investment? We will look very closely at the UNEP FI Principles for Responsible Banking, one of the most significant developments in sustainable finance over the last year or so, and we're going to be celebrating its one-year anniversary as well. And we're going to also explore and talk about how investors are looking beyond climate at other broader environmental factors. And we're going to be hearing from experts in that field. The forum is put together by Climate Action. Climate Action was established in 2007 and organise these events and many others. You'll be very familiar with them, I'm sure. The official event partner is UNEP FI. I mentioned the Principles of Responsible Banking. We're going to be talking more about that later. And this is part of a longer series of events between now and COP26 in Glasgow next year, where Climate Action is going to be undertaking a series of deep dives into different issues, including the TCFD and ESG integration and so on and so forth, many issues that we'll be exploring through these different events online and hopefully in person as well. The headline partner for the forum is NN Investment Partners. They are the asset manager of NN Group, and you can engage with them and speak to them as part of the virtual platform online. Do check that out. I also want, on behalf of the organisers, to take the opportunity to thank other sponsors and the range of virtual exhibitors you can see there on the screen. Many people involved, and you can engage with them through the online platform. They've got they're exhibiting things there, and you can talk to them, interact with them. There are also a range of media partners and other institutional partners. Again, you can see them on the screen. Too many to mention. Lots of the key organisations involved in sustainable finance and investment. Some key bits of housekeeping. Good news, this is being recorded. And so if you miss anything, you can sign on, and after this is finished, it'll be online very quickly. And indeed, you can go back and look at the other parts as well. I've mentioned the platform. You should engage with that, visit it. There's lots of information there. A lot of that content is going to be online for the rest of the month. During the breaks, you can use the platform to connect with other participants. There are thousands of people participating in this online around the world. And you can also do chats and have one-to-one video calls with people. There's an option to do a survey. This is the first online event we have done, or Climate Action have done. Very important that we get feedback on how we're doing, so please do fill that in. And the other thing to mention is that the next big event actually starts on Thursday. So Sustainable Investment Forum North America kicks off this Thursday, and you could register online. It coincides with UNGA Week and Climate Action Week in New York. Now, it's online, but we want to have interactivity. We want you to engage. So please do ask questions. You can do that via the platform. Details are on the screen. You can also do that via social media on Twitter. Just make sure you tag in the right way, and also just be clear who you're asking the question to, and be clear who you are and where you're from, and that will help us ask the questions to the fantastic group of speakers that we have today. So first up for this fourth and final part of the European Forum is Martin Spolc, who's Head of Sustainable Finance Unit at the European Commission. And that's going to be followed by a virtual panel chaired by Simone Detling, who is the banking lead for UNEP FI, with a really impressive group of senior leaders from different banks around Europe. So we're now going to have Martin. Martin, are you there? Hi, Martin. So glad you could join us. Obviously, you've got a critically important role in the European Commission in the DG for Financial Services, leading work on sustainable finance. No, I can't think of anyone better to speak to some of these questions that we have here. So the first question I have is around the action plan on sustainable finance. Is it sufficient given what's happened over the last 6 or so months? And if it's not, what are the plans that the EC has to increase ambition?
Good morning, Ben. Good morning to everyone. First of all, thank you very much for the invitation. And by the way, congratulations to UNEP-FI for the first anniversary of the Principles for Responsible Banking. We in the Commission are very happy about these private initiatives that are really popping up like mushrooms, and we are very encouraged to see significant progress. Ben, on your question, no, we don't think that the action plan on sustainable finance is sufficient in the current context any longer. As you know, the action plan was developed and presented in 2018, in spring 2018. It had 10 big actions. We have delivered almost on all these actions, but there are two major changes that really have really influenced the current context. And the current context is the European Green Deal, which is increasing and scaling up the ambition considerably. You have seen certainly the announcement by the President of the Commission last week, increasing the targets for climate reduction by 2030 to at least 55% instead of 40%. Which obviously requires a much higher ambition and higher pace of our reforms. The second important context is the recovery and this crisis, recovery from this crisis, which obviously requires a much more fundamental thinking about the resilience of the overall system and whether we have all the right tools to manage the risks, not only of individual institutions, but of the overall system. So, against this background, we are preparing a new strategy. We launched a comprehensive public consultation in spring, starting in April, that finished in summer. We received more than 650 responses. The feedback was really massive and very, very useful. And we intend, before the end of the year, present a renewed sustainable finance strategy that will really scale up the ambition and shift the gear to a much higher pace.
Fantastic, really good to hear. And could you say a bit more about your plans for internationalizing sustainable finance and ratcheting up the quality of sustainable finance globally? You've obviously announced this platform for sustainable finance involving a range of different jurisdictions. What are your plans for that work?
Well, first of all, even if we are successful in the European Union, and we will address just 9% of global emissions. So therefore, it's really very important to work with all key international partners, all key jurisdictions that are keen on promoting this agenda. And we were quite frustrated 2 years ago about the absence of any forum that would allow key jurisdictions who are promoting their agendas in their countries to have an exchange, to discuss who is doing what, and not only who is doing what, but also to understand, whether we can converge on some of the standards that we are developing. We don't want to end up in a world where we have different taxonomies around the world that would be completely different, that would really create a lot of headache for investors. So that was the reason why last year in October, Executive Vice President Dombrovskis launched this initiative of international platform on sustainable finance, which is now grouping approximately 15 jurisdictions, including all EU member states, representing more than half of global emissions, half of GDP and half of global population, but that's not enough. So now, in view of the challenges we are facing, we need to really think harder. And that's, by the way, something that we have received from our public responses. We need to think harder how we can ensure convergence not only with those partners, but with other countries who are not yet in the club or who simply might not wish to be part of the club, and to have a strategy. How to also help emerging markets and developing countries who are not yet necessarily in the platform.
In relation to the taxonomy, because you mentioned that as one key aspect of this international collaboration, how do you feel you're going to be able to get consensus on certain issues? For example, China and differences of opinion on what counts as green, what's net zero compatible. How do you see that being resolved in the future? Is it easily resolvable? And if it's not, how are you going to try and resolve it? Or is that not in fact the objective? Could you say a bit more about that?
Absolutely. Yes, indeed. The main purpose of the International Platform on Sustainable Finance is to do first a mapping of who is doing what. And in coming weeks, we will present on behalf of the whole international platform, a report that will summarize the findings of this mapping that has been done over the last year. And the next stage will be to find a common denominator of the different taxonomies, of the different disclosure standards, of the different green bond standards. We have already started a bilateral discussion which goes even deeper with our Chinese counterparts. Chinese colleagues have made quite a significant progress on taxonomy in particular. We will obviously have these discussions as part of the overall platform, but we do believe that there can be some convergence done, and that will be the announcement that we plan to have in the next 3-4 weeks. What will be the next steps on the pathways? We do not underestimate the difficulty to achieve this convergence. We are not naive to think that we can have one harmonized global taxonomy that would be applicable to all. We will need to have some kind of margin that would allow for the specificities of individual countries, but at the same time that would allow for at least a basic minimum integrity of the whole system globally. But currently, in the absence of having any kind of global standard setting body that would in a way ensure a political buy-in of a common taxonomy, we need to improvise. The international platform is in a way stepping in for the absence of having this body working at the international level. We are doing everything what we can, but the challenge is really very significant.
Thank you for that. Really interesting. Now, just moving on to the recovery packages, particularly in Europe, and people are looking at with a huge amount of interest at the significance of this so-called Hamiltonian moment for the European Commission, the European Union, where you'll be issuing bonds, borrowing money from the capital markets, and you've said, I think, that a third of those, or a significant proportion of that, will be using green bonds potentially. Could you say a bit more about those plans and how you're thinking about that and approaching that?
Yes, we have made it very clear that in the Commission we don't see any trade-off between speedy recovery and a very fast transition, at the same time smooth and orderly transition towards sustainability. And as you know, sustainable finance agenda has been so far focusing on mobilizing private capital and making sure that the private capital is filling the gap, for the investment needs that we have. At the same time, now with all this massive recovery package and the different public packages at the member states level, we need to make sure that this money, these flows, will not undermine the European Green Deal, and on the contrary, will accelerate it. And that's the reason why the President of the Commission announced last week the intention of the Commission not only to make sure that we will spend at least 37% of the next generation for the European Union program, 750 billion for the Green Deal objectives, but we would also issue at least, we would have a target of 30% of these funds for the recovery facility to be financed through green bonds, which will in a way align the policy that we have so far pursued for the private sector with what the public sector should be doing. I think that one important improvement that we need to reflect on is how we align the framework and the tools that we have so far encouraged and the private sector to use with the way how public sector operates, and also basically in a way not to be hypocrites and to tell the private sector you have to do this, you have to do that, and the public sector will do something different. So with these announcements, we are also showing that we are very serious about promoting the European Green Deal in the recovery context, and to make sure that these two agendas can reinforce themselves.
Yeah, no, they're absolutely very reinforcing, aren't they? So just on the green bond point, because this is a very significant quantity of issuance that will be coming through. Have you thought about how you might help to develop markets in more nascent types of green bond? So, for example, sustainability-linked bonds, where the coupon varies on the basis of whether the issuer meets different sustainability performance criteria, or indeed looking at social bonds or other shades of green or different types of sustainability issue. Have you thought about how you could use that in a creative way to help nurture those different aspects of the market that are a bit less developed than the standard green use of proceeds bond?
Yes, Ben, we have, and I think that this is an encouragement that is coming very clearly from the stakeholders through our public consultation. They argue that the European Union standard for green bond that we are developing in parallel. We have launched another dedicated consultation on that. Might not be, it's very important, but might not be sufficient. And therefore, we have been encouraged to work much harder on the other types of bonds, not only social bonds, but you mentioned the sustainability linked bonds. And by the way, these discussions are progressing quite fast.
That's really good to hear. Yeah, I'd really love to see a sustainability-linked bond issued to provide capital for a series of sustainability-linked loans. That's what I'd like to see. But anyway, tell me more about how you see the EC member state interaction on this, because obviously, some of this is going to be delegated to member states. How are you going to help make sure that this really is channeled into things that are aligned with net zero, and what kind of standards are you thinking about applying? Is this all covered by the taxonomy, for example? Will there be kind of obligations associated with member states receiving funds?
Well, the details of the implementation of the announcements from last week are still obviously internal, and we will disclose them very shortly. Nevertheless, last week, the Commission issued already guidance to member states with a concrete set of encouragements and guidance that we would expect the member states to follow. In the first place, we do expect that member states will make sure that they are not causing any harm with any plans that they might have. Any money that will be provided through the EU Next Generation EU program must not create harm, which is, by the way, one of the key principles of the taxonomy regulation. And second, there is indeed an encouragement to make sure that there is a substantial contribution to meeting the environmental objectives, not only a marginal contribution. What will be the proportion of the money that will flow into the substantial contribution, and what will be the proportion of money that will go to kind of less substantial contribution still needs to be seen. We are now discussing whether it's realistic to have all 30% or 37% that I mentioned fully taxonomy compliant. That's, again, still subject to internal discussions. But for the time being, what is really important is to make sure that there is no harm, and second, that the contribution to meeting the European Green Deal objectives are substantial.
Great. Well, thank you, Martin. There's an opportunity for the audience to ask questions, although we are running out of time. Martin, could you say a tiny bit about TCFD? And we're approaching 5 years since the TCFD was announced in Paris at COP21. Disclosure is very important. It's a part of the Sustainable Action Plan. What's your focus on that going forward? Do you think other things need to get more attention or not? Is the distribution of effort currently correct between these different kind of areas and policy priorities, disclosure, green bonds, and so on? Do you have a view on distribution of effort and what we should be focusing on in the next 5-year period?
On the TCFD, I think that we were one of the first jurisdictions in the world who made it very clear that we will implement the TCFD in the legal framework. The first step that we have done was that we provided guidance to corporates how they need to and what they need to disclose when it comes to climate risks. This guidance already had been published. Now, what we are doing, we are preparing a legislative proposal that will make all these disclosures mandatory for the corporates. We believe that the absence of clear regulatory requirements and disclosure requirements for corporates that are clearly based on the TCFD framework is a big problem, is a big gap that needs to be filled. And this legislative proposal that we have already announced will be presented in the beginning of next year. Once we do that, obviously there will be negotiations of this proposal, but if everything goes well, it would basically mean that all the TCFD work, and by the way, an upgraded work, because in the European Union we are not only taking care of the risks that the institutions are facing, but also the impact of institutions on climate and on other sustainability objectives, will be a big game changer.
So, two kind of questions percolating up from the audience, and again a reminder for the audience to participate. One is in relation to data and research, which is also an area close to my heart. And the Commission has funded lots of really important projects, research projects on sustainable finance that are resulting in tools that financial institutions can use, PACTA being one of them, just off the top of my head. How are you integrating the sort of the research data requirements of the financial system to address sustainability issues into your research kind of planning framework and the successor to Horizon 2020?
In the first place, we have a big department in the Commission, which is called RTD, which is now an integral part of the project team that we have in the Commission, which is substantially contributing to everything what we do. There are three main conditions that need to be met for the success of this project. The first one is political support. I think that we have that. Second one is a strong partnership with the private sector. We have that. We are going to announce a new group of experts with whom we will be working in the next 3, 4, 5 years. And the third and the most important condition that yet need to be developed better is to work with the scientists and with the research and academia. And I'm not telling only you, Ben, representing academia, but we need to make sure that the whole project is credible and is science-based. We are having endless discussions on this as part of the taxonomy discussions in particular. Obviously, taxonomy is a very important political project, but in order to work, we need to make sure that the criteria that are being calibrated are science-based and obviously not influenced by the politics to the extent possible. That's exactly why the research element, not only for the taxonomy, but for any other measure and any other action that we will propose as part of the renewed sustainable finance strategy will be so important. I cannot now tell you anything concrete. I mean, that's something that you will learn about in the next strategy.
Great. Well, Martin, thank you so much for your time and giving us your time, and wonderful to hear about all the things you're working on. Hugely impressive, really significant, I think, that we'll be getting this revised Sustainable Finance Action Plan by the end of the year, and continue all of your good work, and congratulations, and stay in touch. So thank you.